I'll use external. We'll go with OBS. All right, can everyone hear me? Can you guys give me just a confirmation before I get started? Awesome. All right. So my name is Gerardo. I'm a senior product manager at NVIDIA. And in this session, I'm going to try to cover a bit of the journey into tech, how I transitioned to PM, and some learnings I got. So as an introduction, I studied JD. I actually did law back in Spain. And before the JD, I had a degree in business administration. And after practicing for 6 years, I decided to do the MBA. Before I got to Haas, I was the lead negotiator for South Europe at Cisco. And earlier than that, I had tried to do a startup that had failed miserably. Spent a year doing it. It was a lot of fun. We managed to sell it for very little price. We barely recouped our losses. But that's a bit of the baggage that I came to Haas with essentially very little entrepreneurial experience. And most of my experience was doing negotiations. Now at Haas, I led the tech club from 2017. In 2017, one fun fact I did is I did every single class trip, and I did them twice. So I did Haas Boats, Las Vegas, Yosemite, and I did several tracks. I did Japan, South Africa, and Israel. And my favorite classes, funny enough, one was entrepreneurship because I had an interest in that, and I had done it wrong in the past, so I wanted to learn from it. But the other one ended up being corporate finance, which for a lawyer, for someone that was coming from a very different background, I thought that was pretty funny. The Haas gives you that, right? You can actually explore things outside of your comfort zone in a very safe way, and I ended up loving corporate finance. But anywho, getting into the meat of it. Job search prep. I'm sure all the full-times are now going through these. Some of the evening and weekends sometimes ask me how the full-times prepare. So this is a quick recap of what I think is what you need to do in that recruiting semester in your first year. First off, you all need a foundational story. These are the 30-second and a minute and a half pitches. These things are awesome for coffee chats. So even if you're not interviewing actively, it's always very good to get it straightened out. And I do recommend that you guys have it out as soon as possible, so even last month. But if you're late to it, just get to it now, it's fine. And in here, what's critical is I believe CMG can really help. They do an amazing job at assisting people with this. The second thing that you need for job search is a target list of companies and jobs. And very few people do this early on. I think it's amazing if you can define a target list of 3 companies you would love to work at, that you would kill for, and an extra 5 that you would really like, and then have your backups. Have maybe an extra 5 there or 7 backup companies. Get a total list of 20 companies, 15 companies. With this, you do a job search that's a lot more targeted, that you actually have a meaning and a purpose when you're doing the job search. And I do recommend that you close that one out early on. The other thing for internship seekers is to start doing company research early. Once you get to interviews, you barely have any time with the semester going on, etc. So it's good to get that going. For full-time job seekers, for the evening and weekends, that doesn't have a specific deadline, but I'd recommend the same thing. Is if you're looking into some companies, do the research early. Most of the times you're looking at similar industries, so the research is always applicable. Then resume, cover letter, these are must-dos. You guys know that CMG can help you. You guys know that peer advisors are great at it as well, so use them. I cannot tell you how many absurd resumes I get at NVIDIA. How many silly things like, I don't know, they forgot to add dates. They forgot, I had one person last week who forgot to add their degree. So it's like, and you had to call them and like, oh yeah, I should put that there. And it's like, all right, that told me enough about what I wanted to know. So important to have those nailed out. You guys know that we have an electronic system at Haas that will review your resumes automatically. So utilize that if you're interested. And then we get into the preparation. So behavioral questions or a list of your best stories is a critical asset to have, even just for coffee chats. And in here, peer advisors are what worked best for me, what I thought was the biggest help when preparing this. CMG can help too, but usually I would go to CMG to straighten them out at the end. I think at the beginning it's better to just run them through a peer and just work on them. And then one thing I can't understate enough is Case prep is key if you're going into PM roles. Every single PM interview I did, every single PMM interview I did had case. So casing, we do case groups at Haas, so you know that there are several ways of doing this. You can do them informally, you can do them through the tech club, or you can ask CMG if they will be willing to hook people up together. Every year is a bit different. I don't know how it's going for the class of 2020, but the majority of people I worked with at Haas basically just did informal case groups, and these were an awesome help to me. I strongly recommend them. I felt tremendously uncomfortable with casing. After 10 hours of prep, it came like a second nature. Once you have all of these, what you're going to want to do is start doing mock interviews. One of the most common feedback I got as the president of the tech club from companies was that Haas students were very prepared, but they were overly nervous, some of them sweating, some of them shaking even, and a lot of them seemed to have not done interviews in a long time. This is something that we can tackle. It's normal, by the way, all MBAs have this, but this is something that if we prepare together, that if we tap into peer advisors and we tap into second year CMG, you can even tap into the network. You can even call alums to do this. And mocking really helps. By the time you get to the interviews, you're much more prepared, and it really shows. And then finally, for internship seekers, you guys know that you have a very defined deadline of applying to tech between December and January. Most of them will close, and then there will be the second round, which usually happens between March and May. These are very defined deadlines. You need to know them in advance so that you don't lose your dream job just because you lost a deadline of the company you wanted. All right. Moving on, I'll also tell you a bit of how I prepared, how I structured it. And for context, the reason why I'm going through this, my preparation was an overkill. I did way too many hours, but it really paid off. As a foreigner, as an immigrant who needed a visa, who was coming from a low background that had to transition into a new role, I had many difficulties, I had many obstacles. And despite all of that, I came out of the internship seeking process with 11 offers. So I really think that preparation can help. I really think that you can hack this system. It's a matter of addressing how much you want to go into it, because of course it has everything is about time management and choosing your priorities. But I'll give you an overview of what I did. So I started in August and September doing a lot of exploration. My biggest challenge was what I wanted to do. I wasn't quite sure. I came to Haas thinking I would do business development. That's what my essays say. As I guess most of you had an essay that probably you're not following. And what happened is on my first CMG meeting, CMG told me point blank, you're never going to get that job, which was soul crushing. And their argument is valid. What they said is, in the MBA, there's a lot of ex-consultants. And what the ex-consultants do mostly after the MBA is business development. There are not that many job openings for it. So you're going to be competing with ex-consultants in departments which are made up of ex-consultants. So for example, at Cisco, at the company I was working at, I asked every single person in business development in most of the teams was a McKinsey. That meant that, yeah, I could try to network myself into it. I could tap into my network and get connections to get an internship there. But I was always going to have to go against that. I would be competing for promotions against all McKinseys with a McKinsey boss that, of course, prefers the McKinsey background. So their message was really clear. It's just, you can try, you're not going to get it. I'm stubborn, so I tried. I actually ended up getting 2 offers for business development, but I can tell you it was by far the hardest. And it didn't make sense. So what I did in this phase is I spent a lot of time talking to second years and to alumni on what they were doing. I was just asking, tell me about your job, tell me about what you loved about it. And I started learning about what things were possible. And this is the biggest thing I got out of Haas, is that journey of self-exploration that I would have never done without coming to the MBA and being able to do it with that network that Haas provides you. Once I finished that exploration phase, and I'll cover it again in a slide in case some of you are going through it, but I settled that I wanted to apply for a PM role in gaming. I also explored some PMM roles just to cover your bases. I explored some biz dev, but that was going to be my main focus. So from that, I went into October, November, and there I focused on preparation. I was meeting with CMG once a week for 1 hour. I had two case prep groups because I sucked at casing, so I really needed to get on it. I was meeting 1 hour a week with peer advisors, and we set up a networked job search team. And that was between 3 and 6 hours a week. It was a lot of commitment. I think I ended up doing like 40 hours of prep. Honestly speaking, in hindsight, I could have done this probably with maybe 20 hours, maybe 15. It really depends where you're coming from. If you were in tech before, you probably have to do less. If you are coming from consultancy and you want to go to a business development role, you probably have to do less. But this is my overkill system that I can tell you works for sure. You decide how much you want to go into it. After that, in December, it was basically I had finished my training. I did a couple of mock interviews during December just to not get rusty, but I spent most of my time just doing applications. I did an overkill. They recommend you that you apply to 5, 6 companies. I applied to 27. I was coming from Spain, so a job market that had 70% unemployment when I came out of college. So I wasn't gonna take any chances. You don't need to do that. So I spent 10 hours. You can probably do a lot less. Just make sure that you have your target list, get those 8, 10 companies that you really like, apply to 2, 3 roles there, and you'll be fine. And then from that, we go into January and March. You'll have a lot of interviews. Some of them overlap. Sometimes you're going to have very little time. What I recommend is that you've done your company research ahead of time and that you essentially dedicate 1, 2 hours to prep pre-interview. Now, of course, I had classmates that, for example, got the Google interview and they were prepping for a week. That can happen. You can have that one interview that you really want to focus on. But for the majority of the time, this is going to be a very busy time. You're going to have classes, you're going to have trips. It's good to have prepared ahead of time. And then April, June is still interview season for internship seekers. This is where you have to adjust your strategy. If you don't get recruited in the January to March timeframe, do not panic. That's about a third of the positions. The majority of positions occur later. And actually, the vast majority of great positions are always very late. There is a famous example at Haas of a girl, a lady that she was one of the last in her class to get a job. Because the jobs that happen in January for a June internship are so far away, they normally don't know what you're going to be doing, and they just recruit you in a lump sum, right? They just put you in a bug, and then they'll say, okay, we'll do this. So what this girl did is she ended up being the PMM for the iPad. So the season where the iPad was launching, they needed someone to help launch it. She was inserted into the team. She had meetings with Steve Jobs. She had an amazing summer, probably the best internship experience I've heard of. And that happened because the best jobs occur when a company suddenly realizes, okay, we need people for this. This is exactly the project we're going to do. I'm going to tell you exactly what your role is going to be. And she had that advantage that she could choose that. So don't despair. If it happens late, it's still worth it. For full-time seekers, the calendar is of course different. I was gonna do a slide, but it's really not worth it because it's just in time. There are high seasons, so the majority of companies will hire for the summer. The majority of companies will hire at the beginning of the year. Right now, for example, we're in a dry spell. A lot of companies like Google now are checking budgets, preparing team allocations for next year. So if you're looking now, you will see a decrease, but usually the first 3 months of the year and the summer months are the high peaks. If we move on, I also wanted to tell you briefly what I focused on to transition to tech, which I was coming from tech, so that was easier, but especially to PM. In my opinion, there are 4 things you need. You need to have domain expertise. Whatever field you're moving into, everyone wants someone that knows about that field. That doesn't mean that you cannot transition. I, for example, was coming from an enterprise background in networking, and I ended up moving to a gaming company, which is very much consumer focused. So even though I would say I was still in tech, to me there was a massive transition. Now, how do you prepare for that? In my case, I had the domain expertise already. I was moving into an area that I knew very well. For, I think it was 6 years, I competed professionally in a video game. So I was doing hardcore gaming in World of Warcraft. I was top 7 worldwide, which was an absurd amount of hours spent there. Who would have figured, right? I actually, when I was looking for my passion, that came back. It came back that I wanted to do something in gaming, and that's when gaming hit me. I realized I had the domain expertise for it. But while I already had it, I still had to study. So I went to events to learn about the gaming industry. I looked into some classes. I checked a lot of conferences. I have a famous example of this. A friend of mine, a classmate of mine from the full-time program 2018, he came to Haas to do marketing. And the internship, he failed it. He hated marketing. He realized, in his words, and I work in marketing now, I guess, but in his words, it's an industry designed to lie to people. And he has this epiphany after that, which is, I want to do something that truly changes lives. He had had a tragedy in the family where someone had died in a driving accident. And he suddenly realized that he wanted to go and do something about it and wanted to move into self-driving. So we have a guy that was a banker that had done an internship in marketing, had nothing to do with self-driving. So he started doing this. He went to events, he took a class on mobility, and for conferences, he realized there weren't any good conferences for self-driving cars for MBAs. So what he did is he set up the first MBA conference for self-driving at Haas. Because of the Haas name, he was able to recruit partners from McKinsey, from BCG. He brought VPs from Uber, from Lyft. And guess what? After that, he made a lot of connections. People loved the event, and he got a full-time job offer at Uber, which is where he's working now. So don't underestimate the power of Berkeley in this sense. You can make a lot of connections and learn a lot about industries there. There is a second element then, which is the technical expertise that you need for transitioning to tech and to a PM role. Now, I need to be straight here. There's no cheating this. If the role requires technical expertise, you're not going to get it if you're not an engineer. And even if you're an engineer, if you have no experience working in that area, you may not even get it. I knew I couldn't get a PM position at Google being a lawyer. Google back then was only hiring technical PMs. They have changed that a bit now. For internship, they are looking into business PMs. But when the company only looks for that, you're in or you're out is binary. However, many other PM roles do not require an engineering degree or experience in the technical field. They only require you to have a working knowledge. One thing I focused on extremely was to make sure that I did not come out as a lawyer in everything I did, that I came out as someone that likes technology. So my foundational story had that. My resume screams technology. And a lot of the stories I had prepared for behavioral questions actually talk about how I did stuff with technology. And by the end of it, one of the things that I got after the interviews was, were you really a lawyer? Because it shocked them. So technical expertise is something that you can insert into a lot of your documents, into a lot of your pitches, so that you come across as someone that understands and gets the technical side. Here, there are also great classes at Haas. We have from PM classes to Intro to Code is a class I really liked, etc. There are online courses in case you want to do anything with coding. Friends of mine did Python classes, for example. And one thing you can also do while you're at Haas is you can take an internship. One thing that some people do is, I'm going to take a PM internship at a startup. I will work with Skydeck to help a startup there. That allows you to, with a very low barrier of entry, get experience in PM. And that's how, for example, some people that I coached while I was a peer advisor at Haas did. People that were coming maybe from an NGO that had done accounting for an NGO, and then they wanted to transition to tech and PM, which was a massive endeavor. They worked for 6 months in a Skydeck startup, getting paid very little, admittedly. But with that, they had PM in their resume, they learned the skills, and they even made connections with other PMs. So that's a great way of bridging the gap for the technical expertise. Now, I added one here, which is compatibility. Even if you don't have the most technical background, all we need right now is for you to be able to interface with technical people. So in a way, all we need is for you to be able to deal with engineers, to deal with all the sides of the business that the PM deals with, right? There are things here that we can do. Again, Intro to Code is a class I've always recommended because I don't think it teaches you anything about coding, but it does give you the very basic language, the lingo of engineers. There are product management classes at Haas, and there is another one at the School of Information, Lean Agile Product Management, that it's not the best class in the world, but it does give you the compatibility access, right? It gives you the vision, the methodologies that PMs use. Understanding, for example, how is a design thinking framework, understanding how the typical frameworks that PMs use, understanding what the user story is. Getting all of these feedback, it's not really technical expertise, you're not a coder or anything, but it does allow that compatibility between you and the PMM and engineers and the other parts of the organization. And the last one I'll say, which I know people hate, is, or at least people in my class hated, Haas at Work. Haas at Work was a really tough class for me. I always say it's consulting for people that are not consultants in teams that are too big for consultancy with a methodology that's too loose for consultancy. The thing is it's a recipe for disaster, but I loved it. My class of Haas at Work was an amazing experience to get design thinking experience, to get experience directly working with a client, to get a bit of the journey of how would you go inside of an organization to a VP, pitch him an idea and scope it out. So it's personal as well. So it was my experience. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone, but it's one I do recommend. And then the last thing that you need to be able to do this transition is transferable skills. You have those already. What you need to be able to do is scope them out and be able to articulate them. To be a PM, you don't have to have been a PM before. To be a PM, what you need is to be able to work cross-functionally. You need to be able to express ideas clearly. You need to be able to present to execs. You need to be able to prioritize, to drive projects. All of that is things that all of you have done in previous jobs, I'm sure. So what you need to do is be very concise about it, be able to extrapolate those, and be able to confer those, again, when you do your resume, when you do your cover letter, or when you tell your behavioral stories. Make sure that those come across. And when I interview PMs, for example, it's something that I'm looking at constantly. Is okay, they're not a PM, but can they do this? And you'll get it through that. Then this is what you guys need to be able to do transition. There is the piece of what you want. I do recommend that you test it out. Product management is a hypothesis. A lot of you will be drawn to it because it's a popular exit, because salaries are supposed to be better, although I can tell you engineers make more. But I get the fact that it has an aura of reputation. Test it out. If you can take a class that has some similar experiences, we have the applied innovation classes, Haas at Work, we have startup classes, startup disco. There are a lot of opportunities at Haas to test out the hypothesis of whether you like to build products, whether you like to work with engineers. Try it out. It will save you some time. Then learn the language. I think I touched a bit on it on compatibility, but what you really want to know is just be able to interface with people. Read as much as you can on PM workshops, on PM classes, network. Just speak to PMs, hang out with them. That will tell you two things. It will tell you the terms they use, and it will tell you if you like the person. I did a silly test when I was at Haas, which was network with the people that were working in companies I wanted to work in. And just hanging out with people, I started seeing trends. So I'll give an example. They tell you never to give examples in these cases. I'll give you an example. I hanged out a lot with people at Amazon because I was really intrigued by Amazon. And I realized that the way Amazon people are, the type of person they recruit, they're awesome. A lot of them were friends of mine, which is why I was networking with them. It's not the type of people I like to work with. They're overly structured. I like looser environments with more free thinking. So that's something I got out of it. It's a trick. It doesn't have to work for everyone. You cannot extrapolate with a company is like talking to three guys, so you actually need to do a lot more networking. But it's something I was trying. And the other thing you may want before you come into a PM role is to get some key skills. So there are things that you need to be able to do. I, for example, as a lawyer, I like to communicate like lawyers do. I wanted to be concise and tell everything to everyone. Learn top-down communication. Learn design thinking. Learn some strategy. Learn even some corporate finance. When I do now budget analysis for new features that we're going to do, it's actually awesome. So there are some key skills that you're going to want to look at, see what your skill set is and what you're missing, and delve into that before you head into a PM role. Now, I want to touch briefly on the exploration phase. Can I get a quick survey here on the chat? How many of you are doubting what to do next? If you are, just put the +1 or say me on the chat. And if no one is, then I'll cover this quickly. Okay, I'm seeing a couple. All right, so I personally had no idea what to do. I came to Haas thinking I was in enterprise networking, big corporations. I think I can do that again. Maybe I moved to Cisco, which is a bit more of an old-fashioned company, to a VMware, which is more forward-thinking. I don't know. That was my whole thinking. And I was doing negotiations before. I was a corporate counsel, but I had worked with business development managers. I thought I'll do business development. It was a really small transition. When that got shredded, I had to go back completely and rethink the whole thing. And some of my friends were doing that, and they were just going for the closest thing. They couldn't do business development management. They went into operations. I actually tried to think it from scratch. And I went back, and I have some horrible pictures to show you, and kind of looked at my past. And I figured, okay, what was I like when I was 18? Well, when I was 18, I just had to find what to study. And I kind of looked into the major transitions of my life, right? When you're 18, when you decide a major, when you get your first job, when you get your first job, and when you come to the MBA. When I was 18, I was really influenceable. My decision there was, do I choose passion or do I choose safety? And I ended up for a BA in business with a JD after. But my hobby was World of Warcraft. That's what I was doing. That's what I was loving, and I was really good at it. So that was a learning. There was a major disconnect between what I ended up doing and what I loved. When I chose a career, once you have studied business and law, I wanted to do something that applied both. So I was a little smarter this time, and even though the natural reaction would have been to go for consulting or for a law firm, I decided to do it in a tech company because I knew that there was a disconnect that had happened before. And I went into a tech company to do negotiations, which I personally loved, but my hobby then was web design. I actually hosted a website, which, I mean, we're recording this, but don't let this get out of Haas, please. I hosted a website called howtodownload.com about piracy, which was massive. And it was an awesome experience. I met a lot of people in the open source community. I went to conferences. It was a great time. Again, there's a bit of a disconnect between going into a massive corporations with very structured processes in a legal role and doing a bit more of the hacking your way through web design, not knowing how to code and learning everything on my own, and then interacting with all of this community and making relationships. So that's the second thing I realized I had missed when I did that. And when I went to Haas, when I decided to go to Haas, looking back, I realized that I was at the comfort zone. I had been doing the same job for 6 years. I had gotten promoted and I had gotten bigger deals, but it wasn't going to get any bigger than that. I think that the last contract I negotiated was $500 million. Like from there, yeah, you can get into the billions, but it's going to be the same thing. And I knew I was looking for my passion. And one thing that had happened is that my brothers had gifted me a GoPro. For a little bit about me, when I was 25, I suffered a back injury that left me without walking for 2 years. And the recovery was horrible. It took a lot of time. And after it, I kept a really low-key life because I had seen how bad it had been and I didn't want to get injured again. And my brothers gave me a GoPro and said, you need to do the opposite. Now you can walk again. You need to go explore. And I didn't quite grasp that when it happened until I went through this exercise that has, when suddenly, life kind of stops when you go to the MBA and you can reflect on it. And looking at that, I realized that, all right, I know I want to be in tech. I know I want to be in a free thinking environment, more mobile, more agile. And I know my passions were different. I didn't want to be confined to a desk job, to an enterprise environment, to just doing, regular work. And that's when I started thinking, what if I do something completely different? And we had a conference that one of the clubs that Haas used to put together, the Play Conference, where I actually ended up hanging out with two alums. And the alums were a VP at Google and a VP at Pandora. And everyone was pitching, everyone was doing their foundational story and telling them, I want to work for you, I want to work for you, can you give me a job, can you give me a job? Which I understand, don't get me wrong. But I was quiet there listening, and they asked me at one point, I said, what do you want to do? And I didn't think of it, I just leaped and I said, you know what, if I could do anything, I want to go to gaming, that was my goal, and fuck business development, I want to be a PM. I want to be closer to technology, hacking things like I was doing with the web, and I want to go do it in an industry that's different, that's more passionate, let's stop being careful and just have fun. What happened then was kind of amazing. They were friends with Pete Balasquieska, who is the founder of Major League Gaming, one of the major competitions for gaming in the US. So they said, oh yeah, we went to class with Pete. Do you want to come hang out with him? And they hanged out every Tuesday. They got together for beers. So they invited me over. I had a chat with him, and from there, the next thing I did was, you guys know the new building that we have in the NBA, the Chu building. Chu was an alum from Berkeley that did his fortune with gaming. So then I said, you know what, fuck it, let's try and see what happens. And I pinged him. I sent him an email and said, Chu, can I talk to you? I also did Haas, and I kind of want to go into gaming. And he responded and said, sure, drop by, we'll talk. And so he gave me an hour. Now, please don't everyone go now and ping Chu, because then he's going to know it was me, and then we're going to spam him. But he let me speak with him for an hour, and he ran me through all his rationale on the industry, what he saw, what was interesting, what wasn't. And that's when I just started flying with it. I started telling people exactly what I wanted to do, not what I thought they wanted to hear. I started telling people what I was dreaming of doing, not what I thought I could do. And everything just unraveled. What happened then is I changed from business development to PM. I went from looking into established firms into innovative companies, and I found NVIDIA. I was at one of the company tracks that we did, and I just came because I was a gamer, so I was a fan, and I learned that they are the pioneer in gaming. They're pushing the envelope, doing cloud gaming and all these new technologies. At the same time, they're doing AI, and AI is actually being used throughout the company. And they are also the pioneers in robotics and autonomous machines. I think it's 80 or 85% of the autonomous machines in the world are now being run by an NVIDIA computer. So it hit me. It was everything. I could go back to my passion. I could do it in a company that was a lot flatter, with no hierarchies, it's kind of chaotic, but it's really fun. And I could do it doing the stuff I love. So I went for it. I cut my bridges. I had an offer to go back to Cisco, to a really good role, higher salary than what I have now, higher role, etc. I went for it, and I had a slide here on what NVIDIA is, but I think you all know. If anyone doesn't know what NVIDIA is, put it in the chat and I'll come back. But the internship was awesome. This is what I did. This is really the outcome of 3 months of research. I was tasked to coming up with a strategy for esports. So I analyzed the whole esports industry. Every single box that you see in here, I talked with. I talked with hardware developers, with gamers, with game developers, with competitions. I trained with esports teams for 3 weeks. I actually spent a week living with an esports team, just going out with them, doing everything. Talk to advertisers, see why they were interested. And it was awesome. This is really the culmination of everything. It was my passion. It was everything I had learned in the MBA that I didn't know what to do in the MBA. This was a strategy framework. It required a lot of analysis, a lot of financial analysis. It clicked. And on top of that, I did it at this awesome company where they took us to paintball during the internship. I ended up cooking paellas in the back of the buildings on Fridays. That third picture, you're not going to believe me, but that's Jensen's house. That's the CEO's house. So every summer, he invites all of the interns interning at NVIDIA, which is 300 to 400, to his house, and he does an awesome party. That's his living room. And then that's the one on the right is the esports team I hanged with. That's Team Secret, who are one of the top 3 teams in Dota 2. And well, again, what can I say? Had a lot of fun. It all made sense, so I decided to come back for the full time. I came back initially to do esports, but one of the cool things about NVIDIA, because it's a bit chaotic, is I discovered broadcasting. I discovered that there's a trend in gaming where people want to broadcast themselves to Twitch, to YouTube, and other platforms. That's growing like crazy, and no one was doing it here at NVIDIA. So I started a whole department for it. Initially, I was the PM, I was the QA, I was the PMM, I was doing PR. I even started my own Twitter and YouTube accounts in the name of NVIDIA. And now we actually have a whole vertical. Now we have engineering teams, we have QA, we have a marketing department. So that's been super exciting. And my latest adventure is now I've taken on creators. So now I'm tasked with defining what's the hardware of the future for creators and how people will create in the future. So again, very excited about that. If I can finish this, the last thing I wanted to say was, if I can give you any career advice, is when you're looking for a job, make sure to define the goal. And it's okay to change it later, but go through that exploration, go through that phase of what do I want to do, and be open about it, tell people about it, and just chase that goal. And throughout the path, you'll be able to adjust it. Like even when I was going through that path, I was still just checking a couple of business development roles just in case. But just give yourself the chance to go fully into that goal. Second, understand the problem. Don't start interviewing. Don't start doing the prep just because you have to. Try to, before you start, map it all out. Because once you map it, you'll remove a lot of the anxiety. You'll understand how much work is needed, and you'll be able to plan it. I have seen many of the students I help with as a peer advisor struggle because they don't know what's next. They don't know how much is missing, and they just had existential anxiety everywhere they went. So map it out. It will give you the calm, and you'll be able to do this a lot easier. And then the number one rule, it's be nimble. As you guys know, one of the principles that Haas is students always. What I get out of that is you're going to have to study throughout your life. You're going to have to keep updating yourself. But what is really interesting is if you have to keep updating yourself and you have to keep changing, you must do it in something you like. I don't know how many of you studied something you didn't in the past. I went through law school without really being in love with law. And that was really hard to do. I have spent way too many hours studying tax law for something I hate. And that was a learning. It's a lot easier now. Because now I get home, and if I need to read up on a new trend, it's actually fun. If I weren't working, I probably would be reading that just for fun. So the moment that you're working in an industry that you're actually interested in, it becomes much easier to keep yourself updated. And then to close off, I'll tell you the best three advice I received at Haas. By no means are the best advice ever. It's just what I heard. And this is actually from Chu. He said, there are three ways in which you're going to get rich. You can start something, which is what he did. He had a massive amount of risk, and every entrepreneur will tell you that, of course, it's better to be an entrepreneur than go to business school or whatever. That's simply because they came out on the right side of the risk curve. But it is very rewarding if you're really passionate about what you're building. Second, the second way of getting rich is ride the rocket. So one thing that I learned in entrepreneurship class, the people that came on board to Google on Series A made nearly as much money as the people that were there in seeding phase. It's not so much about having the best idea in the world as to when there is a big startup that's coming up and that has the right idea and you know they're going to succeed, get that job. And the problem there is that everyone wants to work for that, so you need to be highly skilled so that you're hired. So that's another angle. The third one is to ride a wave. And this was his personal recommendation to me from Chu. It was because I was telling him I'm an immigrant, I need a visa, I have a wife, sorry, and I need to take that into account. She was leaving her job behind in Spain to come live with me, etc. So the risk profile of the entrepreneur wasn't made for me. And the rocket strategy makes sense, but for me as a career switcher, it didn't make any sense. I didn't have the profile to be able to get a job like that. But he did say you can ride the wave. If there is a wave of technology coming up that you identify and you know it's good, what happens is at the beginning, waves don't pay anything. Esports, for example, in gaming, competitive gaming, doesn't pay much. But when I did my internship in esports, very few people were working in the industry. Getting industry expertise early pays off, because by the time the industry grows, you're one of the first that has experience. As money starts coming in, salaries start going up, and they need to hire people that are experienced, and you get those jobs. Just doing an internship in 2017 in esports led to 2 offers before the end of the MBA. Because esports grew a lot just throughout that year, and suddenly they needed people. So this strategy certainly helps. It has 2 components, the riding a wave. It needs to be an industry you love, because it could take a while for this to succeed and you're going to make less money in it. And if it doesn't succeed, if the wave for some reason doesn't happen, at least waste your time in something you loved. So this is what I had for this session. I will open it up for questions now. I'm not sure how many of you have voice chat because I see you all muted. If you want to put them in the chat, that works too. If not, I can cover some of the questions that we got on this Lido. So while you guys are putting those, I'm going to just pull the questions up. So first question was, how is a gaming PM different than other PMs in other verticals? We have more fun. No. Um, gaming PMs, gaming is very visceral. Our customers know gaming very well and they're very opinionated. We're very attached to the product and we know the products very well. In other PM roles, you don't need to understand the industry as well. You don't need to have that attachment. In gaming, most of us are gamers and all of us game. Even the people that are not gamers in the team, they game weekly with us for 1 or 2 hours to keep themselves updated with what's going on. So that is one difference. The other one, gaming is a very dynamic industry. It's changing a lot. In many ways, gaming is the forefront of entertainment. It's where the first things are tried. VR comes out and they try it there first. AR comes out, they try it there first. So that's also very exciting. You have a lot more dynamism than in other roles. And I guess the last one I'll say is in gaming, the companies that pay MBAs for PM roles well are the very large and established companies, especially if they have a technology angle. So AMD, Intel, Nvidia, all of those as hardware manufacturers, they pay well. Logitech, even established game developer like EA pays well. If you go into anything smaller, salaries are considerably lower. So that's something I learned when I was doing my job search. You guys may be interested. Next question. Would love to know if NVIDIA has any full-time PM hiring plans for graduating MBAs. We do. We do just-in-time recruiting. We have current roles open. And many times what we also do is we extend full-time offers to interns. So, for example, in the last 4 years, we have extended at least one offer to one of the MBA interns in my team. Whenever we've had 2 interns, usually we only have one opening, but usually we get one intern and they, unless something didn't click, they do get a return offer. Of course, again, we can't promise anything, depends on company circumstances, needs, blah, blah, blah. Next one, is domain knowledge critical in getting a PM role? There are 2 types of PM roles, the ones where you need to understand the business case very well, and the ones where you need to understand the technology very well. If, for example, in gaming, you need to understand the use case very well. The technology behind it is complex and engineers deal with it. In other roles, for example, if you're doing networking, where I was before at Cisco, there an understanding of the technology tends to be more important. Okay, so that's something I do recommend is if you're more passionate about an industry or a use case, look for those. If you're more passionate about the technology, you have the other ones. It's really hard to tell you up front which is which. You need to network and find out. Next, if I am in a hardware technical engineering role, how do I go about choosing which PM role is a good fit for me? Example, gaming versus autonomous cars, servers, etc. Now that's a good one. I get this one a lot from engineers at NVIDIA. It's hard to transition from engineering roles to PM for a couple of reasons. Why? The salary is smaller, so you need a salary cut. But really, you need to get off the headset, the mindset of being super technical, super into the weeds of technology, and extract yourself to see the use case, the business side, etc. Because you're gonna have to do that extraction. For engineers, I tend to tell them you need to be in an industry that you like and somehow know, or you want to learn more about. If you're going for a technical role for a product, that can work too, but then you're coming into a PM role for a product you've worked with or a technology that you've worked with. So those are the true natural transitions. If, for example, here I had a software engineer just last week that had been working on an AI for natural language processing. So I told him the same thing is either you have an area, use case where you really like it, for example, voice assistants. So I said, definitely by all means, Alexa, Google Home would be excellent fits for you. Or you want to go the technology route and tell me exactly what you did, and let's look for roles where we have natural language processing requirements, where you're going to do a product that does exactly that. Usually, in my experience, engineers prefer the first. They prefer to go into a use case because if they're getting out of engineering is because they don't want to be overly focused on those features. But it's up to you, and everyone has their own experience. And the last question I got, what skills are transferable when moving from engineer to PM roles? If I have 5 to 10 years of experience, do I start on a fresh MBA salary? Transferable skills, I'm afraid, is something a bit personal. You need to look into what your experience has been and how you can extrapolate it. From engineering, usually the typical ones that I hear in interviews and that I see is very good understanding of technology that allows you to make realistic requests. It allows you to prioritize features better with engineers, and it allows the connection, the relationship to be easier. Second transferable skill, excuse me, a lot of talking. Second transferable skill for engineers, I would say, is high skill for managing projects. That's all been great. And then from there, I would really have to say that you have to look into your own experience, and CMG can help doing that. One sec. The salary question is interesting. If you're applying as a full-time MBA, you're almost certainly going to get the full-time MBA offer, regardless of your background. Even if they know that you have 20 years of experience, it's just what companies are trained to do. MBA programs have very defined salaries because there is an expectation of raises in the first years after the MBA, or if not, you change companies. One thing we all saw in the MBA 1 year after is around the time where you're supposed to get promoted, companies start pitching to each other, because those people that didn't get promoted then are highly likely to change to another company. So for full-times, that's the case. Evening and weekend, it really depends on whether you convey the value of the MBA or the value of your experience in the interview process. However, once you get that offer, it's not the end of the world. One thing, I myself had 8 years of experience before the MBA. I had worked for 6, and I did 1.5 to 2 years in the startup, right? When I got my offer, one thing I argued with NVIDIA was that I didn't want to get a starting offer. My competitive offer to go back to Cisco was a lot higher. I was able to leverage that offer to get let's say how do we call this? The role I would have gotten 2 years post MBA. That can be either in the form of a grade increase, which some people I helped negotiate got. In my case, grades were not negotiable at NVIDIA because of how it works, but I got a salary bump. And it can be significant. It depends on how well you negotiate it, but CMG will tell you usually you negotiate at 10 to 15% on the overall package. If you actually negotiate a role change, your bump can be 30, 40% easy. So that's something I did. That's something that I worked with classmates of mine because I had done negotiations for 6 years, right? So I helped negotiate some of their offers, and we managed to get it in several of them. Whenever we could convey that the experience granted that you would have hired that person post MBA in a higher role, they normally went for it. And I don't know if you guys have any more questions. I'm checking at the chat. I don't see any. Can we get one or two? The CEO of Cisco always said, never ask for a last question, because if it's bad, you're going to end up on that note. Always ask for 2 so you can get the second one. Right, going once, going twice, and we're off. Guys, many thanks for your time. Many thanks for attending this. I'm going to be sharing the recording as soon as I upload this to YouTube. And best of luck with internship and full-time job seeking. If I can help with anything, you guys have my contact in the Slack. You can pick me through there. I'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions afterwards if not. Thank you very much.